happy the day before Memorial Day.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. And to all of our audience, I hope you're having a safe and good weekend,
Yes, and if you're listening to
enjoyable,
this
I should
on
say.
Memorial
And
Day, happy Memorial Day, and yes, be safe. And how are you doing, pagan
so,
communist?
well, I've been working out in the sun, as food producers do upon times, and
Nice.
so it's kind of nice to come in and take a little break from my trying to make a clean room and
Did I lose you? Are you still there? Uh oh. Lost PC. What happened? Hmm. Still can't hear you if you're there. Still can't hear you. Mm, we were just getting the updates.
that
Oh,
your
there you are. You cut out for a while there. What happened?
I'm cut out. What happened?
Yeah, I lost
You
you.
know?
Rewind
Okay.
a minute or so.
Okay. Well, about that, in order to m- make your produce be viable, besides something as a farmer's, besides something besides a farmer's market, which would be a store, a regular grocery store, or um, schools, or other things like that, senior centers, and you have to get a qualification. You have to get qualified, and that's done by certain things you do in your growing. And what it mostly has to do with is that bird feces.
Mm,
That no bird, if bird feces gets on any of your fruit, which is what any kind of a, what a plant produces is considered fruit.
right.
That then you have to you can't take any other fruiting anything else that's fruited in that in a 5 foot radius,
Wow.
which would kill you, as a small farmer. Now what I love is that the big agro farmers,
Mhm.
of which I know much about, I do,
Mhm.
and they though can just go in 100 feet. I don't know. That sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about 500 acres,
Mhm.
1,800 acres, 100 feet in is nothing. That's like no loss to your crop. The question is so how do the birds know where to go to the bathroom? Right? They're not supposed to go to the bathroom 100 feet into that field.
I mean, what is it about bird feces that is so bad? I mean, it can't just be
Well,
washed off.
it's all of them. Well, that's the whole thing is that should you want to clean it, that becomes a whole other process of which
Mhm.
then takes time and money and energy. So it it it's just well, part of it is, after the pandemic, one should be careful. Do you know what I mean? It is like, yes, I understand. All that can just be washed off, but sometimes the food producer can't be the one to do it when they may not have the resources to do it. Like for me to wash off all anything that I grew in where I live because our water is very expensive. It's one of the most expensive, probably in
Mhm.
the West, and rates in the West. And so for me, that just cuts into my profit. Do you see what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So it's just sort of this whole thing about, once again, how corporations, whether it's in agriculture or not, and for anyone who doesn't think that corporations are in agriculture, you just aren't looking. So, and you should,
Mm-hmm.
because it's really a problem across the globe, not just in America.
Yeah,
It's a
definitely.
it's it's one really seriously across the globe. So that's just so I have to make it so it it's kind of viable for that, and you've got to make it so, and it's not just birds feces, they're talking about rabbit feces and other squirrels and anything else that might get to it. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
actually just be very, it's just not, it's they just don't want people to be able to do it on a small scale. It's just another way that corporations block out the little guy. In this case, the little woman,
Mm-hmm.
the woman and the female, the other gender.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is my joke about, I don't know if you know about this, about the USDA giving. I want to tell everybody this because I know we're getting off the subject, but
It's okay. I'm sure we
so
can link this back to an amendment at
the
some
Article
point.
5, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because if you go to the USDA and you look up farm loans, there are farm loans. Okay, there's one farm loan application for women, minorities, and then there's another one for everyone else. Who do
Mm-hmm.
you think the other category is? The one who's always got it.
The most
That's when, and
persecuted
sort
group in the country,
that's
straight
right, the
white
most
males.
straight males.
Uh-huh.
And the joke being that they can't even see that when they're talking about how that in this new budget bill or in the new USDA budget, they
Mm-hmm.
want minority farmers to get more benefits.
Okay.
And of course, so of course, there's a certain group that think that that means that the white male, you know, farmers are getting persecuted, which is not the case, trust me. Not the
Yeah.
case at all.
Yeah. No, obviously
I'll tell
they've
you
had
who's
the run of the
persecuting.
place for generations.
Go
So
ahead. Go ahead.
no,
Yeah,
I mean
they have,
yeah,
really.
it's
I mean,
clear.
I think it's always been tough on the little farmers, and we're not just talking about little farmers. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the farmers in Nebraska and Iowa and places like that are having a really hard time because you know who's who's actually beating the crap out of them? Mama Nature.
Mm-hmm.
She is not being kind to a lot of food producers across this country. According to one you probably know about, someone who grows corn in Nebraska was talking about how something like half the corn crop of Iowa has been wiped out
Mm-hmm.
in a hailstorm or tornadoes or wind, whatever. Mama, Mama Nature just
Yeah.
came in and said, "You think you're going to grow this? Uh-uh, you're not.
What
Screw
will we
you."
do? Where will we get our high fructose corn syrup?
Well, and that's not. Well, it's not. I get that, but the real thing is that that's what feeds a lot of the livestock. And the
Exactly.
problem with that is I don't want them to starve.
Well,
You don't want them to starve, so they just cull the herd early, and then they don't make any money, and then it just becomes more of a
yeah.
situation about where you're going into, that
I mean, if we want to start talking
maelstrom. Right.
about factory farming,
So,
I'm definitely here for that. And how yeah, it's all this
which is what.
all the water
Go
that's
ahead. Go ahead.
wasted in growing crops to feed animals when the crops could just be feeding people instead of the middleman of livestock. Cut out that middleman, we'd have a lot more food to go around, and a lot more water,
We would.
and
We would.
mhm. And
We would. I
also
just think.
obviously an
Or
easy.
the other thing.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, no, I
Well,
was
what I wanted to say was, it is if you want to, you know, raise animals, a small farm
sure.
or even a small but the problem is they can't make any money. It was just like, it's just, and it's not just here, it's
Oh,
like
you
Britain,
could.
it's
I
like
mean, yeah,
everywhere.
you could
It's
make
really
money.
hard.
You could make money at a farmer's market or at a local co-op or whatever. You could do fine with your small farm, but you wouldn't become a billionaire
No, and not
with a
even a billionaire. I mean, a lot of them are, they struggle. Part of it is because the equipment is just so expensive,
hmm
and it's hard to find, and
But I'm saying the big
and
ones
it goes.
shouldn't exist. I mean, I think
Oh,
there's
yeah, I
if we want to
agree
start,
totally too that,
yeah.
and I think that if you go back more to that, and the other thing is that people really do eat too much meat.
hmm
Even as bipedal mammals, we got evolved to that, whether you like
hmm
me to say that or not. I know we have a little discussion. Rubber Fingers and I have a little not the meeting of the minds on this one, but that's okay. We don't
What?
agree on everything.
I don't
Oh,
even
about
know.
the evolution and the meat and the
Oh,
evolution of bipedals eating meat. Anyway,
yeah,
so
yeah.
you and I have a little bit of a different take on it.
Sure,
Okay,
yeah,
that's okay. We don't have to always agree on
that's fine.
everything.
Yeah,
My feeling is that even if we got to that point, we're beyond that point now of where we have to eat so much that we do.
right,
People eat it for 3 meals a day. That
right.
wasn't normal. That wasn't. We were never even as, and that could be what they think might have actually killed the Neanderthals, was sort of like, quote, their diet,
Mm,
because they ate almost all meat
mm,
because that's all they could get. They weren't, they didn't grow any crops.
mm-hmm,
They killed mammoths and the big moose, the big corned moose and the big game and stuff.
mm-hmm,
And with that is a lot of fat, and they think that it could have actually gotten to their hearts, just like it does to us today.
mm-hmm. Well,
And them being bigger and everything, it could actually have been more likely for them. Do you know what I mean? Because they had to
mm-hmm,
pump more than we do.
mm-hmm.
So, just saying. Anyway, so on the Article 5, you want me to read
Ye-
it? You want to read it today?
well, yeah. Go ahead, and then I'll say the two uh, amendments that I was just thinking about for agriculture.
I'll go ahead and say them now, and then we'll do the Article 5.
Okay. Well, obviously the simplest one is no copyrights or patents on seeds.
Yeah,
That should be
Monsanto's.
illegal. I mean, that's an abomination. The
It is.
genetic copywriting of seeds, that's ridiculous. Um, the second one, uh, I think there should just be a. I mean, I wouldn't be a dictator. If I was a dictator, yeah, I'd outlaw meat, but I'm not, I know that's not practical. I would something along the lines of like there would have to be a, a real world like cost tax associated with eating meat so that it would become cost prohibitive to eat as much as people do, because it should have to cost what it's actually costing to produce. It's all subsidized and it's all, artificially kept so cheap so that people can eat way more than they should be able to. And so, yeah, some kind of like um, either an outlaw on subsidies or an outlaw on certain practices that are unsustainable, or just an extra tax or something like that that would have to be used for something to do with the environment. This extra tax that goes towards sustainability or something like that. I mean, these are, I think, super obvious, but I'm sure I'd get a lot of pushback on those. It's not as easy of a win as something like legalizing cannabis or you know some of the other ones we've talked about.
Well, it is, and I mean, you're talking about food producers, and that group is so divided. I mean, geez, they're like in a
Hmm.
civil war themselves, and that's been going on a long time. I mean, since I was a young woman in the San Joaquin Valley of California, which is the biggest food producing area of the country,
Hmm.
basically. And it was even then where big farmers, big ranchers, whoever you want to say,
Hmm.
wanted to continue using a certain type of fertilizer or pesticides or whatever. And there were people there saying it's not sustainable. It's not
Hmm.
sustainable. And they were basically, well, I don't believe you. We'll find that out.
Hmm.
Okay. See what I mean? So they're not a group that moves quickly off of anything.
Hmm.
A lot of them food producers. You have that's what I'm saying. It's like a real civil war. You have ones who want to use are constantly looking into using new methods to do food producing to be more sustainable and to use your resources better and stuff like that. And then you have this other group that just is basically flips the middle finger to everything
They're the
like that.
most vicious of all the capitalists in some cases.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
Mhm.
I hear you.
Mhm.
Well, okay, shall we read? You want to read it or shall I?
I don't care. Whatever you want.
I guess I will because you did it yesterday. Okay.
Okay.
The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Mm.
Okay. Our very long
Run
run
on
on
sentence.
sentence that's like the most powerful one ever written.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gotta. Yeah, I always laugh at that. Section. All right. So we have some myths about the Constitution.
Yeah. Where did
And
you find this and what are you reading from?
it's actually from I found it online. It's
Mm-hmm.
from the National Archives,
Mm.
and it's called Pieces of History, and it's from 2013. So the first one that they bring up, which I think is very interesting, is that the myth is that many people think a president can veto a proposed amendment to the Constitution. But if you just heard us read the Article 5, you know that that is not the case.
President is not even mentioned.
Not even that person, because they didn't even have one when they wrote the Constitution, I don't think yet. I don't know. Had they decided yet? We'd have to read that. Maybe they did. But I don't know that they really, they had anybody calling that they were calling a president then.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have anybody elected. I mean, I do know that much.
Mm-hmm.
That much of history I'm sure of. George Washington didn't become the president until after the Constitution was ratified.
Mm-hmm.
So even the Constitution had to be ratified by 9 of the states.
Yep.
So we'll say, so lots of people think it's the same people, the same framers who wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776 are the same men who wrote the Constitution in 1787. That is, that's 11 years, right? That's a
Mm-hmm.
long time.
Is that one of the myths?
That, that's one of the myths that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think that a lot of the same men wrote it
Mm-hmm.
and signed it
Mm-hmm.
with two documents. That is erroneous. It
Mhm.
is wrong to think that only six individuals, and none of the ones that you and I probably think so. They were George Clymer, which probably nobody knows, right?
I
Benjamin Franklin, everybody does know.
Mhm.
Robert Morris. Do you think that's the Morris Company? Philip Morris Company? I'm just kidding. I have no idea. George Reed, Roger Sherman. Do you think he was a relative of the other Sherman? And James Wilson. Do you think he was like one of the relatives of President Wilson?
You got me on
I'm.
all of those except for
I
Ben
know.
Franklin.
I know. We're all joking. I'm just joking
Mhm.
around. This is what I do. So they were elsewhere. Like Thomas Jefferson, as we spoke in an earlier episode of our um, podcast, was in
Mhm.
France
Mhm.
as the like American minister, or what we would call now an ambassador, and John
Mhm.
Adams was in Great Britain at the time. So that's why, and a lot of them were dead or in sick. I mean, this a lot of them, as I've said before, the Civil War was not the Civil War. The Revolutionary War was not kind to. It was not kind to a lot of the men that signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the
Mhm.
British did see them as enemies, and when they caught them, they were very mean to them. Some they killed. Some they treated so badly that they died shortly afterwards because their health was so broken, because they didn't get proper food or medical care
Mhm.
while they were in prison. So, I mean, the ones who made it were the ones who didn't really stay in America, mostly. I'm not trying to be mean, a little, but, you know, so the ones that we think of as our greatest ones, I always have to look at and say, were they just lucky? Were
Mhm.
they just luckier than the others? Was it just a statistic that they just got to be there instead of, like like I said before in the Declaration of Independence, when I looked it up, like, or when I've read about it, and people have done lectures about it, professors and stuff, is
Mhm.
about that John Adams was older than Thomas Jefferson, and he didn't want to write all that crap. He'd already done all the writing he wanted to do. So, and like I said, when if you made a mistake, you had to start from scratch and go back.
Mhm.
And Adams was like, I'm too busy of a guy. I'm married. I got kids. I'm like on my way. I'm doing things.
Mhm.
So he just left it mostly to Jefferson. So it wasn't that Jefferson wanted it or that he was a great orator or that he was seen as this really. Actually, he was not charismatic. He wasn't that well liked. He was thought of as kind of a stick in the mud. I mean, there's lots of things that people say about him that
Mhm.
are not very nice. And I mean, not, I shouldn't say not nice, but just not very flattering. And so, but that's part of how history can idealize somebody, can glitz somebody
Mhm.
and make them not what they were. They just blinged them, gave them some gling and blitz, and
Right.
made them all pretty and shiny. And they're not. They're not terrible, awful, no good, very bad people. Although in some cases I would say that.
Mhm.
But I
Depends
mean,
on
I find them,
who you were.
yeah, who I am and how I look at them now. And, just things like that. So that's what I now more look at them as the context of which they were not perfect. They were very fallible.
Mhm.
And they just, I almost think at some point for some of them it just got a little out of hand. I think they didn't really think they were going to split with England. I mean, a lot of them I don't think really wanted to. Do you know what I mean? Like they were just sort of making that point, like, like you do, like you have kids, like, okay, I'm leaving.
Mhm.
Only you can't really leave. It's just a threat.
Mhm.
But the child doesn't know that, and sometimes they don't care if you threaten them or not. In this case, you know, what I mean is that I think it did get a little out of hand. I don't think they really thought that was going to happen. And I don't think they ever thought they would win.
Mhm.
And had circumstances not just kind of fallen into place, we wouldn't have. I mean, the fact that if George the third, always forget. George the second. I think it's George the third. George the third who got sick. They say it's porphyria. We don't know, but he got sick, and he was not of sound mind, so he could not make decisions. And at that time, the monarchy of England wasn't quite willing to deal with like a full-fledged war without their king behind them. In a
Mm-hmm.
way, you know what I mean. Parliament was not really ready to do that, and that was part of because actually he was a very he. I think that had he not gotten sick, we would have lost the war.
Mm.
Okay, I'm going to say it.
Interesting.
I'm going to say it. He was a and militarily he was much better, and we were really equipped and had no money.
Mm. I
The
mean,
only
that's
benefit
usually
they
how it
had.
goes. It's like
Go ahead.
one, something swings in the right direction, and then history is changed.
Well, that's what they say about Agincourt. That's a famous battle. That's
Mm.
where the French aristocracy were basically wiped out in for 2 generations.
Mm.
I mean, fathers and sons were killed on the battlefield, just wiped out. And the one and that's the famous one about that there's bowmen, and bowmen were the English bowmen, and bowmen at that time were considered very less than as far as military. They were the
Mm.
dregs. They
Mm-hmm.
were, because the knight, of course, had a horse and armor and all this, and
Mm-hmm.
what the hell do you have as a bow? Well, as it turned out, right before Agincourt, the Battle of Agincourt, it rained a
Mm.
lot,
Mm-hmm.
and the ground and oh God, I can't remember who it was that fought it. I can see it now, but anyway, the British king managed to get the high ground. It was just the way he came, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here they are trying to run up kind of a hill in their armor, and the French didn't do so well.
Mm-hmm.
And the longbows could go much further because they were higher up anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And when they started doing the retreat, the route, as they say, it just was a massacre because when the French ran, it was so wet. Like I said, anytime they got near the river, they would just fall in with their armor and they drowned.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't get out, the weight of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
So.
so that's what I say. A little bit like that, just a little rain
Mm-hmm.
changed history
Right.
for like 100 years.
And so, what about? Let's go back to the myths of the Constitution.
Oh, that's
So.
that. The other one was the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution establishes a system of federal courts, which it doesn't.
Ah. Okay.
It only establishes one Supreme Court and left it to Congress
Mm-hmm.
to establish lower courts, which is why if they were to get rid of the filibuster, that they could make a lot more judgeships,
Mm.
a lot more courts to put
Mm-hmm.
judges on. And so instead of, quote, packing the courts,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they would call it. But really, we have a problem with we don't have enough courts in this country anyway. It takes a long time for a lot of cases to go anywhere
Mm-hmm.
because they have such backlogs. And now with the pandemic, it has gotten even worse.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be done in a much quicker time. Do you know what I mean? There could be a lot more
Mm-hmm.
courts done,
And I want to come back to the
made.
filibuster too, because I have more to say on that. But
Okay.
okay, what's this? So
And then
that's another myth. Okay.
right. The Constitution gave the Supreme Court the power to declare laws unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Hmm.
no. The Constitution makes no mention of judicial review, which is
Hmm.
common in our legal system now. So see what I told you about that Supreme Court? Little
Mm-hmm.
power monger grabbers. Judicial review goes back to the English common law and was affirmed during the 34-year tenure of Chief Justice John Marshall. In the landmark case Marbury versus Madison. And yes, that Madison is the Madison as in president in 1803.
Mm-hmm.
Today, federal courts at all levels can declare laws unconstitutional, although the Supreme Court has the final word. So they didn't think that that was the way that you did it, but the court just decided that they could. Okay, the other myth is the Constitution set the number of seats in the House of Representatives at 435. No, the Constitution gives this power to the Congress, which has increased the number of House members as the nation's population has increased. The House of 435 members was set in 1911,
Mm.
110 years ago. It has temporarily exceeded that number for a few years when new states were admitted to the Union, but reverted back to the 435 after the next reapportionment, which is census.
Mm-hmm.
The original proposed Bill of Rights included an amendment that would have set a maximum of one representative for every 50,000 people. Had it been approved, we would have a very large number of House members today,
Mm-hmm.
and the Constitution did say that each state would have two senators in the Senate, regardless of the state's population.
See, I think that should be an amendment right there. There shall be one representative per 50,000 people. Like, that's easy. Because our representation right now is all out of whack. And you could lump that into an amendment that gets rid of gerrymandering. I'm going to be on a warpath against gerrymandering here in a little bit too, because liberals have just been twiddling their thumbs and wagging their fingers at gerrymandering, but not doing shit about it. It's like, well,
Well, and
okay,
I don't even call it that. That's the liberals. I mean, this is a situation that happened with Karl Rove when Obama got in, which is Karl Rove figured out that you didn't have to spend very much money to get state
yeah.
legislatures to be one-sided. Let's just come right out and say it. One predominantly one party.
Well, I mean, yeah,
And
Republicans are going to do what they're going to do. It's up to the opposition to fight back, and they have
right,
done
it's
nothing but
just that
wag their fingers.
well, and even when they've ever tried to do anything, okay, like in Virginia, there was a Democratic governor, right?
Hmm.
And the Republican legislature stripped him of all of his power.
But I'm saying the liberal groups certainly haven't done anything
They've
like
tried, but
call
it's
for a Article 5 convention to
no, because they
to
don't
amend the
think like
Constitution to
that.
get rid of gerrymandering. So exactly. So they're
Right.
afraid of their own shadows. They're afraid to
Well, or
actually.
they're unaware that it's
Yeah,
actually an option, or that they
you're
thought
being
that
very
this could be.
charitable.
I am, but also too, let us be realistic, which is um, that for whatever reason, as we have discussed this before with Article 5, calls for conventions,
Hmm.
that they take a very long period of time
Hmm.
to have much movement on them.
Hmm.
Like the Convention of States believes that they have 28 states for, let's say, a balanced budget, okay? That's from the 1950s. But
Hmm.
there is much argument over that of whether anything that was written like 70 years ago would still be valid in word usage today. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
The very wording that they use.
no,
But
I
I'm
mean,
just saying that would be. Go ahead.
unless it explicitly has a sunset date in it, then we know it would still be valid because the 27th Amendment took 203 years to ratify. So I mean, it's the same thing for
Yeah, but
with
that was
calls.
different because that was different because the language of that amendment was written and it went to every state with the same language to be ratified.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is that in these 28 states that the state of conventions
Uh-huh.
says that they have, that the language is not necessarily the
The same.
same.
Well, that's fine.
The
Yeah, whether they would be counted as the same or not, I
right,
that's a different question than if they've expired.
right,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm
was
not
just
saying that
talking
they
about I
expired.
was just talking
I'm
about
just saying that
sunset.
they may not.
Okay, yeah.
Right, you were, but I was
Sure,
talking
sure,
about
sure.
that. It seems to take a long time. Like even the balanced budget's been around now 70 years,
Right.
or whatever. Close to 70 years. So I'm just saying that they take such a long time that the people that thought, oh, well, it'd be quicker to try to go through Congress.
Yeah.
That was naive on their part. Yes.
Mhm.
Had they started in 2008, 13 years later, we might actually be somewhere.
Mhm.
But if you don't start, you never get anywhere,
Right.
as we know. So,
Okay.
so now another myth.
Mhm.
The House must choose one of its own members as Speaker, and the Senate must choose one of its own as President
Hmm.
pro tempore, right?
Mhm.
Temporo?
Pro temp.
Okay. Pro temp? Okay, pro temp. Well, I would have thought that, but this one is
That's
spelled a
just the
little different.
shorthand. It's pro
Okay.
tempore or something like that. But
That's it. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so very good.
Mhm.
No, no, that's not true. The Constitution says only that the House shall choose, in this case, they misspelled it. So it's choose, Chuse, but that could actually be Old English, their
Yeah.
speaker. The speaker, third in line to the presidency, has always been a member of the House. The Constitution also says the Senate shall it must be, choose
Mhm.
President pro tem. The President pro tem has always been a senior senator. So, so it doesn't say that the Senate,
Mhm.
it doesn't, or that's what it's saying? I don't know.
It doesn't
This one must
necessarily
choose its
have to
own
be.
members as speaker.
Uh-huh.
Let's choose one of, oh, it doesn't have to choose one of its own members as speakers,
Uh-huh.
as a speaker. It could
Yeah.
be somebody else.
That's interesting.
That's what they're trying. But you would still be third in line to the presidency.
Mhm.
The Constitution says all men are created equal. No,
Nope.
that's the Declaration of Independence, and they don't even say that. Because the
Mhm.
Constitution skirts the issue of slavery, counting each slave as three-fifths of a person and determining representation in Congress. While in definition While this definition offends us today, it was an attempt to limit the power of states with large numbers of enslaved people. Otherwise, the enslaved people, who of course could not vote, would have been used to justify larger numbers of representatives for slave states and give them more power in Congress. Once again, how do the fascists manage to do stuff like that? From the get go. From the get go. They're already figuring out.
Mhm.
If I have a bunch of slaves, I want to count them as why I should get represented. Even though they don't get represented, I get more representation.
It's like the fascists are liquid that just oozes down to fill in all the cracks, and it's like the people who love freedom are floating up into the clouds and not getting anything done, not planting any roots or anything. They're just head in the sky.
Well, I think it's I think also too that it's always hard for the people who have noble thoughts to
Mhm.
actually believe that there are people that don't want
Right.
things to be better.
Mhm.
Why do you not want things to be better? I mean, I can't understand why people don't want things to be better.
Because they
But in
think it'll
their
be
case,
better for them, even if it's bad for everybody else.
okay,
I
all
think
right.
people who don't want things to be better for society still want things to be better for them personally. It's just a selfishness, I think.
Well, the idea that you can't, because society right now allows you to, but at some point it doesn't always. It hasn't always. That's part of empires rise and collapse,
Hmm.
rise and fall, rise and fall, rise
Hmm.
and fall. All right, so then this is the other one, the last one, which is probably the most contradicted, the most one that has the most discord about it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what the Constitution created the United States as a democracy. And this says no. Okay. Someone asked Ben Franklin whether the delegates to the Constitutional Convention inside Independence Hall in Philadelphia had created a monarchy or a republic. A republic if you can keep it, Franklin replied. The difference in a democracy, okay, the difference in a democracy, the majority rules. But a republic has a government by the people with checks and balances and a constitution for all to adhere to. Article 4, Section 4 states the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason why this is so contested or whatever, or is questionable, is because the choice really isn't between, okay, the question was, have you created a monarchy or a republic?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we didn't do a monarchy, so whatever it was going to be a republic. I mean, he would answer republic because it was not going to be the one. It
Well,
was going to
is
be
that
whatever it
really
was.
like I always kind of assumed that was just sort of a like
That's my point.
it wasn't a literal quote and a literal conversation that happened. It was just sort of an uh, a
One
fable
of
or
those
a what's that
folk
other
tales,
yeah like a
folk
folktale.
tale,
Mm-hmm.
little folk tale type of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it was closer to that. And as you and I have talked about history, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And a republican form of government is not is that of which you do have more than just one type of what do I want to say? We have what do we call them? Branches of
Mm-hmm.
government in a republic.
Right.
I mean, even they even had that. They even had that in under sort of a dictatorship in Rome when they still had the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Just because Caesar got up there and
So
Augustus and
so
all
what's
of
the
them, they
myth?
didn't
Because
get rid of
I
the
I
Senate.
think that's a well
Well,
known.
the myth is
Mm-hmm.
kind of that that's it, which is we're fight over that deal of republic or democracy, and democracy itself doesn't mean a majority, a,
I have no
a rule
problem
by
with
the majority,
saying we're a republic. I've always said, yeah, of course we're
but
a
it
republic.
doesn't. But my point is, I don't think it's that big a deal to argue over.
Yeah, who I don't know. That one I find a
That,
little
that, that's,
less.
that's, that's my
Well, no,
point.
I guess
That's,
you're no. It is sort of a myth that people say we're a democracy. Like that's just sort of. But when they say we're a democracy, what they mean is we're a democratic republic. That's what people mean when they
yes,
say we're a democracy.
we,
Like,
we
yeah,
vote for the people.
yeah,
Right.
and it's
That's what they
basically
mean.
shorthand
Right.
for saying we're
So,
not a
right,
monarchy.
right. That's my point, which is
Yes.
whatever it'd be like if he said, so if Franklin, and this is, we're just saying, we don't really necessarily believe that it happened, but let's say that it did. That somebody walked up to Franklin right after he walked out of the Independence Hall and said, okay, what kind of government did you make? A democracy or kiss the sheep? And he'd say,
Right.
we got to kiss the sheep because we don't
Right.
have a monarchy. So that's my whole point.
Right.
It wasn't like it was a yes or no question, or it was that or. It was
Right.
an and it was an or question, right? So
Well,
he picked the one that we weren't. So it didn't matter. It's just a matter of semantics, and I don't think it matters that much. And that's my point, sort of, that we will talk about this or argue about this as Americans when there are so many more important things that matter.
yeah, I see no problem there. Okay, and so what was the other
Okay.
the one you left out, right? The first one, which was about Article 5, right?
No, that's
I
the
thought you
one
started with
that
that one
the.
like before we actually started the podcast. You started with that one.
Oh well, no, I thought I did it with this one too. The president can veto a proposed amendment of Constitution.
Oh,
That is the first myth,
I thought it started.
and that is not true.
I
No,
thought the myth
go
was
ahead.
that a convention could run away, or that
No.
a uh
Or that we get a whole new government if
yeah,
if we called it a convention of states
yeah.
or a constitutional amendment convention.
I thought that's what you said was the first one, but okay, I guess it was the thing about the president.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. It's a thing about the president, but a lot of people think that the president can veto
Mhm.
a proposed amendment because they don't know the Article 5 because the Article 5 isn't taught in school.
Right.
We just think that they miraculously appear amendments on the
Mhm.
Constitution.
Well, so speaking of which, I have this little article
Okay.
here that this was written on April, let's see, April 27th, 2021, just over a month ago, by Travis Waldron in the Huffington Post. And let's see. Oh, and it just made me lose my place a little bit, but let's see here. It's about calling for a convention, and it's basically about, it's mostly centered around the Convention of States project, which is the right wing version of calling for a Article 5 convention.
Well,
Um,
there's a group. It's a certain group that is
right.
calling for a convention. Yes, and they call themselves the Convention of States.
hmm And
Right?
we've talked a little bit about them, but just to put it in context, it's the very legitimate effort to call for a convention to amend the Constitution uh, for things that they think would fix the stagnation in Congress. And I think everyone in America is frustrated with government. I mean, Congress has had like single digit approval ratings for decades, right? Uh, Now, we would disagree with their prescriptions for what they want to put in those amendments or that amendment that they're calling for. But I
Or their
definitely,
solution to the problem. Yeah.
yeah, their solutions I think are misguided, but um, I think they at least have diagnosed the problem as being Congress is broken and our system is just stagnant because we should have had multiple amendments uh, in the last 50 years.
Well,
uh,
and I think that, well, yeah, and I think that before that, lots of groups seem to call for conventions to amend the Constitution. I mean, not just this. This is a relatively new one, but since the Constitution's been written, there there have been people who've been calling for conventions
yes.
about an amendment, whatever amendment it was.
hmm
I mean, I don't know what that amendment could be. I mean, I could think of some or whatever, because we do know of some of them, but that were started at the state legislation level, what we're
Legislation,
talking
yeah,
about with the
exactly.
Article 5. Yes. So that's what we're talking about is that this, and it's only actually been recently that calls for Article 5 conventions, as we call them in this podcast, have declined. Like the people, because the people are not involved so
hmm
much in their democracy. And, and I think that that is kind of um, factually based because as new states were being added and people were getting to vote and they were learning about their rights, they found out about the Article 5 and they did things about it. Do you know what I mean? They were like, wow, look, I want to get this done. I want to legalize marijuana, in America. I can
hmm
now use the Article 5 to do that with.
hmm
Do you see? Whatever it was. That for us, that's ours,
and
right?
that's
You know what I
where
mean?
he's going. Let
And
me
that's
read
where
this.
it's set. Go ahead.
So this is
Go
the
ahead.
fear
Sorry.
mongering part of this article. So he's talking about the back and forth while one group passes resolutions calling for a convention, groups on the other side will work with legislatures to repeal the previous calls, um, bringing the balance right back into, where it's sort of just on the precipice of calling a convention, but it hasn't happened because uh, while some calls get made, other ones get repealed. So he says, primarily a conservative effort now, the prospect of a convention excites elements of both the right and left who see it as a useful way to improve a broken and dated founding document, check the powers of Congress, and work around the influence of special interest groups that have derailed popular policies, be they a limit on corporate campaign contributions or fiscal restraints on the feds. Okay, that is all true. Opponents, on the other hand, see a far more nefarious plot, a masterclass in astroturfing that could open the entire document up to a radical rewrite meant to serve the right-wing corporate interests that already dominate our politics, especially at the state level. The convention, they argue, could lead to the demolition of everything from social safety net and environmental protections to civil rights laws, or maybe even the Constitution itself. The First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, said Jay Reitzenberg of Common Cause, a liberal group that campaigns against the calling of a convention. Any civil rights, any constitutional protection in the Constitution could be opened up for grabs in this constitutional convention. Okay, so he's saying, I'm surprised they didn't say the 13th Amendment and that slavery would return if a convention gets called. And obviously they're against an Article 5 Amendment convention. They're smearing it as a constitutional convention that would rewrite the entire Constitution. It says, or this quote from this Common Cause person. So, I mean, giving no evidence, giving no reading of Article 5, you're just saying it, just saying all the and the point is, yeah, all those things could be amended. That you could amend the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, you could repeal the 15th, you could repeal anything in the Constitution if that's what people were calling for, but the fact is no one's calling for that. There's no serious effort to rewrite the Constitution or to repeal the first 13th or any of the amendments, etc. He's just making that up. That's just a fiction pulled whole cloth out of their ass. So you think, yeah, so because their right-wing people already dominate our country, they're going to make things worse? They already dominate everything in politics with big money. And what have you done to protect us from that? Nothing. So unless we get an amendment, nothing's going to change. So then he goes on. For others, the fear is less about what the convention could accomplish than what might happen simply because it takes place. An untested process will likely face questions about its legitimacy from the start. Okay, and right there you're saying it's an untested process. But by saying that, you're admitting that there's another way. It's untested because Congress always steps in first. Did you put me on
Well,
speaker?
and not just that. I mean, and that was sort of what I was saying um, in previous episodes, that Congress has kowtowed state legislators to
Exactly.
them. They have bullied them, so they're afraid to use this power. Like Congress will do something bad to them
But
if they
also
use it.
but also
Go
states
ahead.
have pressured Congress. And that's what they're really afraid of. They don't want states to realize their power to push back on Congress, because
My point. Yes.
that's how
Yes.
it's been used historically for things like the 17th Amendment. uh, it, that was the direct election of senators. The states forced Congress to propose that amendment because if they didn't, the states would call their own convention. And so the fact that it is untested goes to show you that if states are getting to the point where they're going to call a convention, Congress will step in and propose the amendment themselves, because Congress doesn't want the
Or
convention either.
no, they don't.
But if
But on
even if it
something like,
happened, let's say it does go to a convention, there's always the ratification. Like they just, I haven't read this entire article, but uh, do they even mention the 3/4 ratification? I don't
well,
believe so.
even when we went, and we had all of the arguments that is in this paper thrown at us, and more, of which I'll not go into. Um, at our state legislature, because we have done this, that's what Rubber Fingers and I have done together, is go and try to call for an Article 5 convention from our state legislators about a topic. And someday we'll talk about that topic, but today is not that day. And so on that, we were, this is exactly what our opponents to
Mm-hmm.
us asking our state legislators for a call for an Article 5 convention to amend the Constitution. This is what they said, that it would be a runaway convention, that all these terrible, awful,
Mm-hmm.
no good, very bad things would happen, and our whole country would collapse. Well, sorry to tell you, Common Cause, I don't know what you're looking at,
And
because
here he
that
goes on.
Beltway bubble's about to burst.
Here he talks about that. A broad convention, Super has argued, could possibly write its own rules or even change the existing ratification process, and courts aren't likely to intervene. Okay, you just made that up. Um, I think, of course, courts would intervene. Of course, there would be lawsuits. Of course, uh, of
Sorry,
course,
I'm
we
sorry.
could be. Of course, it could be limited. We would
That made me
easily.
laugh too hard.
Uh,
Are you kidding me? I mean, I have the whole Supreme Court in my womb,
yeah.
or at least five of them.
What does that mean?
Just, it means that they. What do you mean they wouldn't interfere? They interfere with a woman's, uh, you know,
Mm-hmm.
body. A constitution? You think they just let the Constitution go? Those
Mm-hmm.
judges on the Supreme Court? They're just going to say, oh yeah, you just wrote me out of that new one? Well, okay, I'm good with it. Yeah, I don't want to be a Supreme Court justice anymore.
Yeah, here he says those fears were especially strong early on among conservatives who worried that special interest groups had foul intentions and that a convention would be. Oh, great, their ads just popped up right to block my reading. Basically, that special interests would come in to interfere with the convention. Special interests are what people on the left want to call a convention to fix, and you haven't done anything to fix the problem of special interests.
For
So
what? The
so what else are we going to do? Like there
special
is
interest?
literally no
Well, I
other
think,
solution.
and who are those special interests? Oh, I think they'd be called corporations. I don't think they're like special interests. I don't know why people use that term anymore. The special interests are the corporations that just want to take more money. That seems to be their only interest,
Mm-hmm.
is getting more money.
So they go on to call it a con, meaning constitutional convention that could rewrite the
Right.
entire constitution, blah blah blah. Um, uh, they tried to thwart the Affordable
Go
Care
along with it.
Act. There, no mention in here about the ratification. Let's see. Yeah, nothing about the ratification process. So again, let's just say if everything goes wrong, I mean, this is really the Trump argument, the argument that trumps all their argument. I don't mean in reference to the former president, but the be all end all argument. 3/4 are required. I mean, you have to say it slow to get it to sink into these people. It says right there in Article 5, 3/4 of the states, when ratified, that's when it becomes part of the Constitution. It doesn't become part of the Constitution if 2/3 ratify it or or 37 states, which would be one less of three-fourths. No, it takes three-fourths, which is 38 states, to ratify anything that comes out of a convention, or any amendment that comes out of Congress must be ratified by three-fourths of the states. So unless that's like your headline of your article, then piss off. You don't know what you're talking about,
Well,
uh,
it's not
and
that
you
you don't
can't
know what you're
rewrite
talking
that.
about. What you are doing, right, you are trying to present an erroneous argument, one that doesn't exist, because you are leaving out viable information that is pertinent to
Mm-hmm.
that, to to the actual thing being done.
Mm-hmm.
Which I like. That's what I'm saying. You cannot get the amendment to the Constitution unless it's ratified by the states. Okay, so we write a whole new Constitution. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. I can't envision that. You're going to go back to 34 states that don't exist anymore and ask them to ratify it?
Mm-hmm.
Cause you think that they're going to change? Because you wrote something? Who says they got to change?
Yeah. Then they
I
just
don't.
go.
I mean, like the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing just makes my. I feel like I've gone into some sci-fi, futuristic, like crazy world
Mm-hmm.
that
So
makes no sense.
after all that
There's no
stuff,
logic.
he just goes on to basically pick apart the Convention of States group and who they are, who funds them, who they're conservatives. Yes, okay. They're supported by
Well, come
ALEC.
on, Common Cause. Do your dirty linen. Tell us
Uh-huh.
who funds you.
Good
You
question.
dark moneyed matriarchal piece of
No, don't
sugar.
call them matriarchal. That's a compliment.
I know. I know
No,
that
but
would be
so
if
yeah,
only they were matriarchal.
it's
They'd be
easy to
better.
go against um, a balanced budget amendment. Yes, we know that's bad. Yes, we know that. Um, I mean, I don't even. The funny thing is, I don't even think they attack the term limits portion of the Convention of States people. Like that's the. It's funny because that's the one that they really push for. That's what the Convention of States people most care about, I think, and the balanced
Well,
budget
that's the
part
one that
too.
I think has not. Well, the balanced budget, as we spoke, has been around for like 70 years almost now. Pretty
Well,
close.
right.
It started in the 50s. But the term limits is a little more new, and it has been accepted by both sides on different for different reasons. But nowadays that we have found out that, since Citizens United and, political money on steroids,
Mm-hmm.
where that people just, it takes so much money to get elected, even if you're
Yeah.
just doing sort of regular stuff. And then you have both of them that have so much corruption in them, like the DNC, that basically says, well, you won't get any money from us, or you won't get any um, buddy to, um, what is it, support you, not support you, but, come out in favor of you, give you, references, no, not that, politically. If I was the, if I, you know what I'm talking about, that
Mm-hmm.
if I was a
Who do they?
senator and you were running for the House and I
Mm-hmm.
came out in
Yeah,
support
they.
of
I
you,
mean, it's a
right,
source of their power.
right,
The money is works in their
right.
favor. Also, the money in the system, and so
And
I
so
mean,
they say
this is a.
you must, but the thing about that is it's like, well, you must then use these certain, I've told you about that, the like PR groups that are all white groups. Okay, they all run by white people.
Right.
Okay, that's what I have heard, and I don't mean to sound
No,
terrible
it's
about it, but that's
absolutely true. The consultant class
and
is.
and the consultant class, and
Mm-hmm.
they're just pieces of garbage because they don't care if they win or lose. It's all for them about the
Yes,
green. And yet,
exactly.
even grassroots candidates now are being so pressured to do that because without them, collapsing to this or, agreeing to this, it's almost impossible for them to win, even if they are grassroots, just because they'll get no endorsements. They'll get nothing. They'll be treated as a leper. and everybody will come out against you. And all you need is somebody like James Clyburn,
Hmm.
that piece of filth. I mean, I know
Well,
it's not because he's black, as you know, but it's, I mean, that he would turn on his own. After being a civil rights leader, it is an abomination what he has done. But just like that, what one endorsement can do for you.
well,
Do you see what I mean?
and this is another question, and I tweeted,
Go ahead.
I posted a comment on a Common Cause tweet today because they tweeted something about, retweet this tweet to the president and Common Cause about that we need to pass the John Lewis um, democracy bill, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and so I commented, so we should get rid of the filibuster, yes? I mean the Jim Crow filibuster, right? And I don't think they're going to respond. I've tweeted that at them before, and they haven't responded.
No,
They
they
have
don't.
zero
Well, they
comments on
just
their tweets. They get
right.
like 30 likes and 2 retweets and zero comments. So I know they're seeing my comments, but they don't respond. But no, they don't want to get rid of the filibuster, and they like to put on a show about wanting to change these things and, oh, the Republicans are so bad. But if the Republicans weren't bad, you wouldn't have anything to fundraise against. So you don't really want to beat the Republicans. You just want them to be up there on a pedestal and look bad so you can shake your fist at them and try and get people to donate to you so that so that people can soothe their guilty consciences for living living comfortably in this broken system. And that's what this guy's article, which is ridiculously long. I mean, this is in HuffPost again, but all it is a Common Cause fluff piece. He just quotes their lawyers left and right, and it's like prohibitively long, saying a bunch of nothing, and never gets to the ratification part. Never really gives the actual side of you know uh, representing Article 5 for what it is, never quotes any constitutional scholars, which all agree that a convention could be limited to one topic. Not a single constitutional scholar agrees with them that it could run away. Every single one, including the guy that we mentioned last time, whatever his name was, um, Weigel.
Mason,
Yeah, something Weigel, right?
George Mason, the
No, no,
court.
I'm talking
What?
about the
Oh,
constitutional scholar that wrote it recently.
oh,
Um,
yes. I remember that he wrote the article on that. I just
yeah,
a minute. I can probably go back and
yeah. No, I
find
mean
that. But
it's ridiculous, and they have no leg to stand on. But they just the problem is,
well, and how interesting
mhm,
that all of a sudden, common cause. Okay, what has happened in the last month on the Article 5? Right, like
Wisconsin
the
passed the Convention of States
mhm, and
resolution.
put
Kansas,
it
I
in
guess
other
it
ones.
got defeated in Kansas apparently.
It
I,
got somewhere else though. It got two
maybe South
states they said
Carolina,
it
I
got.
think too, or one of the
Yes,
Carolinas, maybe something
something
like
like
that.
that.
But yeah, no, it's passing. It's passing in places, so they're getting closer. The Convention of States is getting closer, and it's like, yeah, okay,
Oh,
so now, so you've been fear mongering about Republicans and their scary calls for a convention for all these years, while beating down left wing calls for a convention. So instead of having an opposing side, that people could actually rally behind, all they have left is to cower with you and in trying to, you know, limp wristedly beat off these calls for a convention. I'm not using that as like a slur against gay people. I'm saying weakly
right.
opposing them. Like they're not doing an effective job of actually countering the Convention of States, because the actual counter would be a call for an amendment on something actually that you want amended, not just saying, "Oh, don't do what they're doing because it's scary and could open up the Constitution," when uh, you have no real argument for that. It's just fear mongering.
Well, and Rumor has it, we do not have this supported, but it is, it has been the scuttlebutt, as they say, for a while, that this runaway convention argument started in the 1960s
Mm-hmm.
when the civil rights movement was really getting going because they had concerns that with the coalition and solidarity of the civil rights movement that something like an amendment, call for a convention to amend the Constitution could actually happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have heard that rumor. We've heard
Right.
that rumor. So this is all racist to begin with, anyway. If you believe that rumor, this runaway convention argument is just racist, anyway. It's all based in racism. They came up
Yes.
with something to stop a civil rights amendment to the Constitution.
Right. It was the John Birch
That's only
Society.
rumor. We can have never been able to find any sources, but it's just a little,
What? That it came
on the
from
down low. John Birch
the John Birch
Society.
Society. That's no, that's real.
Oh, that
I'm.
one, but that it was to go after the civil rights movement in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It was to stop the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
Rob Nadelson. That was the constitutional scholar I was looking
Yes.
for. Rob Nadelson on May 3rd wrote an article. Um, and I mean, I don't know anything about his politics. He might be a right winger, but he's a constitutional scholar, and you can. I don't think Common Cause or any uh, of these runaway convention conspiracy theorists could name a single constitutional scholar that agrees with them. So there's one for you,
Well,
Rob
no,
Nadelson.
and it will, and I think that the fact it that Article 5 conventions, or if you want to say constitutional amendment conventions, were called frequently at,
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of the history of America. It says that there can't be something wrong with them, or the people that were, within lifetime of the writing of the Constitution would have said, "No, that's not what they meant at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he told me." Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that. Everyone just talks about what they think the framers meant. Well, that don't mean nothing. What they what you think they meant. You can think whatever you think that they meant, but that doesn't make you correct in what you think.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I can think whatever I think that they thought,
Right.
but that doesn't make me correct. And in real actuality, we don't really know what they thought. Hell, half the time I don't know what I think.
Mm-hmm. But all we can do is fight for what we believe in, what we want to change.
Well,
Like if
that's
you're
it, and that's what
so
I'm saying.
yeah.
That the Article 5 has a very strong history in America, and I think considered very much a part of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It is only recently that we've been told this craziness that, oh, you'll be able to rewrite the whole Constitution and it'll just magically happen and everybody will
Mm-hmm.
wake up one day and they won't live like they do now.
That's the conspiracy theory. I mean, it's clear because we've had calls for conventions since the Constitution was signed and ratified.
That's
We've had
right.
calls for conventions right away, and yeah, no, there's never been a convention because Congress always steps up and calls for conventions put pressure on Congress. So there's nothing wrong with calling for a convention. Now you might think, oh, it would be scary to actually have a convention, but if Congress is inactive, that's even scarier. That should be even scarier. What we have
Well,
now
and
is
isn't
even
it, you know
scarier.
what? They're not even inactive.
Mm-hmm.
They are only. they are for their own self enrichment,
Right.
almost. That's really, I mean, that's when I said to you, I want to do the pyramid party, and I'll just be honest and say, I'm running for total self enrichment. But in
Mm-hmm.
5 years, I'll step down, and anybody who voted for me gets to put their name into the hat, and we'll all vote for somebody else like that. At least, hell, let's be honest about it. At least we can change people out, and they're not in there for Feinstein's years. My
Mm-hmm.
God, how long is that? My goddess, how long has that woman been in? 60 years? 60 years or something?
Well, I
40
mean,
years? 50 years? But I'm just saying, and all
again,
she's done is enrich herself.
yeah,
And
and
nothing's been.
she's been in. I mean, again, it's the entrenched status quo, the political parties, in her case, the Democratic Party, that has gotten her back because she's raised money. I mean, she's good at fundraising. Like all the ones who are in there for a long time, Pelosi, Schumer, all the the party leaders, they've been the most successful at fundraising. So
And once again, that is not my generation
yeah,
out there,
silent
bears
generation.
and dogs. That's the older generation than me.
Well, so I
So they're
mean,
frick. Yeah.
a
I
Common
mean,
Cause and all these people at Huffington Post, I think in rhetoric would agree that yeah, money in politics is a problem, but what are we going to do about it? They'll shrug their shoulders and say, "Oh, well, we have to fix gerrymandering. Oh, we have to fix um, the campaign finance laws." Okay, well, how are we going to do that? Are you willing to end the filibuster? I don't think you'll respond to my tweet where I asked you if you'd be willing to end the filibuster. You're certainly not willing to put pressure on Congress by calling for conventions for amendments. So, what's your solution to fix the problem when the problem is Congress?
well, and that's
Crickets for them.
and the point is that the lobbyists, like Common Cause, are very close with state legislatures.
Hmm.
And that is a
And
relationship
Congress and
that
state,
has
federal.
made, well, right, but I mean, let's say we're just going to go with the state legislators because George Mason and all of the, okay, there was probably as many framers, as many people, as many delegates at the Constitutional Congress that believed that the states should have a lot of power as the ones who were federalists. That's sort of the deal. It
Hmm.
wasn't like everyone agreed on a really centralized federal government. George Mason the Fourth did not, and he is the author or the person that made sure that the Article 5 was put into the Constitution, as well as making sure that the Bill of Rights got added to it and ratified. And 1 year later, he died,
Hmm.
which is sad for America,
Hmm.
our loss, because obviously he was our greatest, you know, proponent. He was the people. He was pushing for the people to have a certain amount of power in their government because
Hmm.
he knew, as anybody can now see, even at that time, that the aristocratic
The
forms
federal,
of government
the Federalists.
enrich well would
The
come
states needed
to
a check on the
enrich.
Federalists.
That's it. That was it. And unfortunately, some of the delegates thought it was written in with the Second Amendment. But there is no way for it to be written into for the Second Amendment.
Hmm.
Because how would you ever not have a stronger military by a federalized central government than you would by a state in there?
Well, we were never
Unless it's
supposed to
where
have
I
a
live.
federal. We were never supposed to have a federal army. I mean, the
Except
founders were all
that
against that.
but well, except it's how wars were won. And I'm not just talking
Right. Well,
about,
yeah,
it's how
because.
wars were won before that and
Mhm.
how wars were won after that. So they knew that that could be a possibility.
Well, but what would happen then
They
was
can't ignore that.
there would have been like a bunch of smaller local militias that would have been well regulated, that would have all been called upon to come gather together as the
But that's my
federal
point of
force. But yeah, they wouldn't have been stationed, as a standing army and maintained as a standing army for the purposes of the
well, and the whole
federal
thing
government.
about right, and the whole thing about the militia. I mean, it's like, okay, where are the states? I mean, when it all started, the states didn't give all their money or not give. But I mean, it's sort of this thing where states give money to the feds, and then the feds decide what they're going to do with it, right? And in some cases, they take from some states and give to others, right? We've
Mm-hmm.
all talked about that, and it's not equitable at all. Okay, so my point being, who's going to fund those state militias but the states? And if the states, how, with the way that it all became of this tax situation with a federal centralized government,
Mm-hmm.
it would never work. That the states would have to fund their own militaries. They do in the sense of a national guard, but not in the way that's still funded by the federal government a lot, even though they're under more the jurisdiction of the states with the idea that they are supposed to be who goes against a tyrannical government that the military would use as a coup,
Mm-hmm.
use during a coup. But I don't know that I think that is a
I
viable
mean, the Second Amendment was never
situation now.
it was never meant to be the way for the citizenry to make changes or to rise
Overthrow.
up to the government, because we have Article 5 for that. That's what Article 5 is for. It's the
Hmm.
peaceful revolution built into the system. And taking that
Yes,
away, that's what leads people to this craziness and this crazy conspiracy theory mentality and this militantism that has taken over, because people have no other recourse for change, because
they have no other outlet.
they've been lied to by these people. And I mean, if I go back to that article, I'm going to get all heated, but it's like they just make stuff up. It could all be it could all be, it could all run away.
Well, and to
There's
call
no,
them,
courts would have no jurisdiction. Oh, there'd be no rules. It's like, well, if we're just making stuff up, I could say, well, hey, if a convention gets called, everybody in America gets $1 billion, as long as we're just making things up, you know. And basically I would rest my case with one point, read from Article 5. And here I'm going to pull it back up for a second just to get the text right.
well, that's what I have always found from the people who are opponents to calling an Article 5 constitutional amendment convention is that they they want this idea that this isn't the way it's supposed to be done. And it's like, well, then why did they write it that way if that's not the way it's supposed to be done?
Exactly. And this is how they wrote it. In either case, meaning whether proposed by Congress or proposed by the states at a convention, in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of three-fourths of the several states or by conventions in three-fourths thereof. Three-fourths.
And in
So,
one case, it took 203 years.
yep, 203 exactly for that ratification. But that ratification is so important that it can take 203 years and it's still valid, but it's still necessary. There's no shortcutting that three-fourths.
That's what I'm saying is that
Exactly.
it can take, you know, so if we called for an Article 5 convention and we wrote a whole new constitution, it
Mm-hmm.
could take 200 years before it got ratified.
Mm-hmm.
And by then maybe we wouldn't ratify it because we wouldn't need it, or it wouldn't be any
Or
good.
maybe by
But
then it
my
would be
point
time and it
is,
would be great. Who knows? Because I mean,
who
and
knows?
they
But
may
I'm
say,
saying,
well,
like, that's the deal. Like, a runaway convention, this thing can take forever,
mhm.
long beyond my lifetime.
Well, this show has already gone on forever.
Yes,
We're getting close to
yes, I
90
know.
minutes. We should probably
So we want to keep hope alive.
with Article 5.
That's right.
All
You
right.
guys have a good week.
You too. Bye,
Bye.
PC.